December in New York always carried a kind of cold that pierced the bones, as if the city itself wanted to test how much a person could endure. On 7th Avenue, rain mingled with snow beneath the streetlights, painting the asphalt in blurred streaks of gold and gray. In the restless crowd, Maya Johnson pulled her thin coat tighter, her worn shoes soaking through with every step. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at the emergency ward, her body aching, her wallet holding less than $20. Earlier that morning, her landlord's voice had sliced through her exhaustion. "If you can't pay the remaining rent by Sunday, I'll have to change the locks." "I'm sorry." Maya, business is business. The words echoed like a sentence. That small Bronx apartment wasn't just a place to live. It was where her mother had drawn her last breath, where the smell of lavender soap still lingered in the curtains. Her mother had died of heart failure 6 months ago, and Maya had spent every last cent of the insurance money on hospital bills and a simple funeral. Now she was alone, and life, it seemed, had decided to keep testing her. That night, a text from a former colleague lit up her cracked phone screen. "The Empire Blue Hotel needs a night shift attendant. Pays double. If you need the money, go now." Maya didn't hesitate. She boarded the last subway to Manhattan, the kind of ride where silence felt heavy and the city lights outside looked too far away to touch. The Empire Blue Hotel towered above the city like a shard of glass, elegant, cold, untouchable. She changed into the crisp uniform, tucked her braids under the cap, and listened as the supervisor barked, "Room 2301. Deliver the wine and warm towel. No questions." When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into quiet opulence. The scent of oak, leather, and whiskey filled the suite. A man stood by the window, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette framed by the lights of the city. He didn't turn around when he spoke. His voice was deep-edged with fatigue. "Leave it on the table. I don't need anything else." She set the tray down, but something on the table caught her eye, a framed photograph of a woman in a white wedding dress laughing beside that same man. There was joy in the picture, but something in his eyes felt unbearably sad. Without thinking, Maya whispered, "She looked happy." The man turned. Blue-gray eyes met hers, sharp, cold, but tired, in a way that felt too human. "She was," he said quietly, "until I chose work over her." For a brief moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence. Maya nodded slightly. "I'm sorry." He poured another glass of whiskey, then held it out to her. "Do you ever wish you could forget everything?" She shook her head. "No, forgetting is a luxury. I can't afford that. I still have to survive." That answer, so simple, so raw, made him pause. He watched her as if she had said something no one else ever dared to. They sat across from each other in the dim light, two strangers sharing the same quiet loneliness. No flirtation, no promises, just silence, rain, and a brief moment where their broken pieces almost aligned. Hours passed. The rain stopped, and somewhere between exhaustion and comfort, lines blurred, and hearts let their guards down. When dawn slipped through the curtains, Maya woke with a start. The man was still asleep beside her, peaceful, the early sunlight tracing soft gold along his jaw. She rose quickly, buttoned her uniform, and reached for her bag. Something small fell to the carpet, her silver locket, the only keepsake her mother had left her. She didn't notice. On the nightstand lay a check for $10,000, his silent attempt to turn the night into a transaction. Maya froze. Her throat tightened. Then, with trembling hands, she tore the check in half. "I'm not for sale," she murmured to no one. She left before he woke the elevator, swallowing her reflection in the mirrors. Outside, the city had begun to stir. Taxis, honking coffee carts, steaming the air crisp with morning. Maya stepped into the rain again. Disappearing into the crowd, her shoulders squared, though her eyes glistened. Back in room 2301, Ethan Whitmore, billionaire CEO of Whitmore Energy, stood by the same window, the city stretching endlessly below. In his hand was the silver locket she had left behind, a delicate heart-shaped pendant, warm from her touch. He turned it over once, twice. For the first time in years, something stirred in his chest. "Who are you?" he whispered into the quiet room. Across town, on a cracked subway bench, Maya pressed a hand to her stomach as a faint dizziness swept over her. She thought it was hunger, or maybe exhaustion. But destiny, as quiet as the falling snow, had already begun to weave its threads. Some encounters are not meant to make us happy right away. They exist to remind us that miracles often begin in the most impossible nights. Morning light filtered through the glass walls of Whitmore Tower, a skyscraper of cold steel and perfection, piercing the New York skyline. At precisely 7:30 a.m., Ethan Whitmore walked into his office, his reflection following him across the polished marble floor, immaculate, untouchable, and lonely. To the world, he was the image of control, a 35-year-old tech visionary whose innovations in renewable energy had reshaped the American market. To his employees, he was the man who spoke little and forgave even less. But to himself, he had become nothing more than the sound of an expensive watch ticking in an empty penthouse. He worked, he built, he acquired, yet at night, when the city glittered beneath his window, he felt an ache he couldn't name. The woman from that night haunted him. Not her body, not her scent, but her words. "Forgetting is a luxury. I still have to survive." That sentence had lodged somewhere beneath his ribs, where even money couldn't reach. For weeks he told himself she didn't matter, that it was guilt or curiosity. But every morning, he found himself glancing at the silver locket lying on his desk, the only thing he hadn't been able to throw away. He'd opened it once, hoping to find a photo or a name. Inside was nothing but a faded scrap of paper with a single word written in cursive, "Mom." He tried tracing her down discreetly, the hotel records, the staff rosters, even the city's surveillance logs. But she had vanished, as if the night itself had swallowed her whole. And so, life went on, or pretended to. Ethan sat through board meetings that blurred into one another, voices droning about profits and mergers. Across the table, his assistant whispered, "Sir, the foundation is still waiting for your approval on next quarter's grants. They're recommending an increase in medical funding this year." He nodded absently. "Double it. Double it, sir." "Yes," he said, eyes still on the locket. "Health programs, community clinics, whatever they need." It was unlike him. Generosity was rarely impulsive, but something about it felt right. That evening, the Whitmore penthouse felt like a mausoleum with better furniture. The city below throbbed with life, but inside, silence pressed against the glass. Ethan poured himself a drink, stared at his reflection, and saw only a man who had everything and no one to share it with. He had spent years learning to love nothing. Nothing couldn't leave you. Nothing couldn't disappoint you. He remembered the warmth of her voice, the way her hands trembled, but her eyes never flinched. She hadn't begged. She hadn't stayed. She had simply walked away. And that somehow had undone him. A few weeks later, his grandmother, Helen Whitmore, the last soft presence in his hard life, called from her estate in Atlanta, Georgia. Her voice was frail, but warm, carrying the grace of another era. "Ethan, darling, I don't ask for much, but the staff here, they're all strangers. I could use someone who still remembers what kindness feels like." He smiled faintly. "You'll have the best caregivers money can buy." No, she replied gently. I don't want the best. I want someone who cares. He sighed, but agreed. Within days, his foundation's healthcare branch began funding local programs in Atlanta, nursing scholarships, community homes, hospice care for the elderly. It was part duty, part penance, and yet something about it tugged at him, as though he were paying a debt to someone he couldn't forget. Meanwhile, in a modest neighborhood on the city's edge, Maya Johnson tied her hair back and stepped into the sunlight outside the Haven home, a small, nonprofit hospice newly reopened after years of neglect. The faded sign above the door now read, "Restoration funded by Whitmore Foundation." She didn't know who Whitmore was. She only knew that after months of temp jobs and uncertainty, this clinic had given her stability again. Her hands still trembled sometimes, not from exhaustion, but from memory. She never spoke of that night, the hotel, or the man whose face she still saw when she closed her eyes. Maya had promised herself that she would never depend on anyone again. So she worked double shifts, endless care, pouring love into those the world had forgotten. It was her way of staying alive. Back in New York, Ethan's assistant brought in another stack of documents. Sir, here's the quarterly list of new partnerships your foundation approved. One, in particular, the Haven Home in Atlanta, is gaining attention for its community outreach. Would you like to visit? He looked up distracted. The Haven Home. Yes, sir. They specialize in palliative care. It reopened last month, thanks to your grant. He hesitated, fingers brushing the edge of the locket on his desk. A small pull, almost like gravity, drew his thoughts south. Send them additional support, he said quietly. And add a note. Tell them I might visit soon. That night, as the city dimmed, Ethan stood by the same window, where months ago he had last seen her. The woman with the tired eyes and the voice that had dared to tell him the truth. He still didn't know her name. But somewhere hundreds of miles away, in a quiet hospice with peeling white walls, a woman named Maya Johnson turned off the lights and whispered goodnight to an old patient, unaware that the man funding her salary was the same one whose life she had changed in a single night. Through the open window, the wind carried the faintest echo, the kind that doesn't make sound but leaves a shiver in the heart. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan Whitmore felt something close to warmth. Not joy, not love, just a flicker like the heartbeat of something long forgotten finding its way back. He didn't know it yet, but destiny had already begun, its quiet work weaving two lost souls back into the same thread of light. The air in Atlanta carried a warmth that New York never did, thick with magnolia blossoms, and the faint hum of cicadas that seemed to stretch time itself. Nestled on the edge of the city, the Haven Home looked nothing like the steel and glass towers Ethan Whitmore was used to. It was an old Georgian-style estate, turned hospice, white columns, ivy, climbing the walls, the scent of tea and antiseptic, drifting through open windows. When Ethan's car pulled into the gravel driveway, his driver glanced at him in the mirror. "We've arrived, sir." Ethan didn't answer. He stared at the wrought iron gate that bore the name his foundation had quietly saved. He had told himself this visit was business, a check-in, a show of goodwill. But somewhere deep down, he felt something else pulling him here. He stepped out, crisp suit, against the southern sun, an aura of distance in a place that breathed compassion. Inside, soft voices floated through the hallways. The sound of laughter, old, tired but genuine, came from the sunroom. Ethan. A voice called thin, but still regal. He turned. Helen Whitmore. His grandmother sat in a wheelchair by the window, a blanket over her legs, and a sparkle of mischief in her eyes. "My dear boy," she smiled. "You finally remembered your old grandmother exists." He bent down and kissed her cheek, the stiffness of his body melting just slightly. You make it sound like I abandoned you. You didn't abandon me, she teased. You abandoned the world. He chuckled. Maybe the world earned it. Maybe, she said softly. Or maybe you just forgot how to live in it. Ethan was about to reply when the door opened. A nurse entered, a woman in a pale blue uniform, hair tied back neatly, her skin glowing warm in the afternoon light. For a moment, the world fell utterly silent. Maya. She froze, just as shocked. The glass of water she carried trembled slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her voice steady but faintly breathless. It's time for your medication. Their eyes met, blue-gray and brown, winter and summer, colliding in a quiet electric instant. Neither spoke. The air seemed to pulse between them, filled with everything they hadn't said that night, and everything they never thought they'd see again. Helen, sharp as ever, noticed. Her eyes flicked between them, a slow smile curling on her lips. Ah, she murmured. So, you've met. Maya blinked. I don't think Maya Johnson. Helen interrupted, her tone. Light is the best nurse we've ever had. I'm lucky to have her. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm sure you are. His voice was even, almost too calm, but the look in his eyes betrayed him something between shock and disbelief. Maya lowered her gaze, focusing on the medicine cup in her hand. Mrs. Whitmore, she said softly, please take this before it gets cold. Of course, dear. Ethan stood by the window, silent, watching sunlight dance across the wooden floor. Every detail of her, the same voice, the same grace, the same quiet strength, crashed into him like a memory he'd tried to bury. The last time he saw her, she was walking away under a storm of rain. Now she was here, in his grandmother's house. Her touch. The reason the old woman was smiling again. After Helen took her medicine, Maya began arranging the flowers on the side table. Ethan's voice cut through the silence. How long have you been working here? She didn't look up. 3 months. 3 months, he repeated quietly. Funded by the Whitmore Foundation. Her hand paused, then continued moving. I didn't know that when I started. And now that you do, she met his eyes, calm but wary. Now I know you still have a habit of trying to fix things with money. That one struck deep. His lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Helen cleared her throat softly, breaking the tension. Ethan, she said with a faint smile, I was just telling Maya how lonely these big rooms feel at night. Maybe you should stay a few days. He frowned. I can't. There's work. Work will wait, she interrupted. Your heart won't. He hesitated. Maya, sensing the weight of the moment, quietly excused herself and left the room. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than thunder. That evening, Ethan stood on the back porch overlooking the gardens. Fireflies blinked in the distance, and the scent of jasmine hung in the humid air. He had spent years mastering silence, but now, every second of it hurt. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the silver locket, and opened it once more. The tiny word inside Mom caught the faint light. He wondered what kind of mother Maya had written that for. You kept it, said a quiet voice behind him. He turned. Maya stood there, her uniform replaced by a simple linen dress, her hair loose, the last gold of the sunset painting, her skin in soft tones. You left it, he said. I didn't mean to. They faced each other, the air thick with everything unspoken. Why are you here, Maya? I could ask you the same. This house, it's under my foundation. Then I guess fate has a sense of humor. He almost smiled. Almost. That night, he began. Was a mistake, she said quickly. You paid for something I didn't sell. I know. His answer came so quietly that it stopped her. I know, he repeated. That's why I couldn't forget you. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the trees. Maya looked down, her voice barely a breath. People like us don't belong in the same world, Ethan. Maybe not, he said, but I'm tired of the one I built. Their eyes met again, and for the first time, there was no anger, only ache. Behind them, the door creaked open. Helen's voice floated from the hallway, warm and knowing. Maya, would you consider staying here full-time? I find your presence healing. Maya hesitated. Ethan turned toward his grandmother. That's not necessary, she can. It's necessary for me, Helen cut in gently, and perhaps for both of you. Silence stretched heavy but tender. Maya looked at Ethan, saw something in his eyes she hadn't before: humility, regret, a flicker of something like hope. If that's what you want, Mrs. Whitmore. Maya said finally then, yes. Helen smiled, satisfied. Good. Then it's settled. As the sun sank behind the garden, the three of them stood in that quiet golden hour, a grandmother who saw too much, a man trying to remember how to feel, and a woman who had spent her whole life learning how to heal others, but never herself. And though none of them said it aloud, each one knew that something had shifted, that the story which began in a cold New York hotel had just found its way back to warmth. Sometimes, fate doesn't knock. It just walks in wearing scrubs, holding medicine, and carrying the heart you thought you'd lost. The Whitmore estate was never meant to feel like a home. For decades, it had been a monument to power: marble floors, grand staircases, and silence thick enough to echo a single breath. But since Maya Johnson moved in, the air had changed. There was laughter in the kitchen again, the smell of cinnamon bread in the mornings, soft gospel humming, drifting down the halls. Ethan Whitmore noticed it more than he admitted. Each morning he'd pass the open door of his grandmother's room and hear Maya reading aloud from Helen's favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird. Her voice carried warmth into spaces that had long forgotten it. He often paused outside the door, not to listen, he told himself, but simply to make sure everything was fine. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. He missed the sound of her voice. Helen, with her sharp wit and soft heart, had noticed everything. You know, she said one afternoon as Ethan adjusted her blanket, the house feels alive again. He arched a brow. You mean loud alive? She repeated, smiling. And I think I know why. Ethan looked up, suspicious. Please don't start matchmaking again. My dear boy, she said, feigning innocence. I'm far too old for schemes. Though, she winked, if two people happen to share a late dinner by candlelight, who am I to interfere? That evening, when Maya came downstairs to fetch tea, she found the dining room already set. 2 plates, candles lit, soft jazz playing on the old record player. Mrs. Whitmore asked me to make sure you ate, she said, awkwardly glancing at Ethan. He smirked. I think she asked both of us. It was the first dinner they shared since New York. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was careful, the kind that hummed with everything neither dared to say. You've changed, Maya said quietly, cutting her salmon. So have you. Maybe she smiled faintly, but some things don't change. You still like control. He looked up, startled. Control? You fund this house. You control its future. Even when you care, it's like you're afraid to show it. Her words struck deeper than she knew. He set down his fork. Maybe control is the only thing that's ever stayed loyal to me. The music played on. Neither spoke again, but something had shifted, a thread pulled taut between them, fragile but undeniable. Weeks passed. They learned to exist in each other's orbit, quiet mornings, shared glances, small kindnesses. Ethan started working remotely from the estate, taking calls from the sunroom, so he could hear the faint sound of Maya's laughter, drifting from the garden. One afternoon, while reviewing blueprints for a new solar project, Helen wheeled herself in. "Still saving the world, dear." He smiled, trying to. "Good. Then start with yourself." She handed him an envelope, aged paper sealed in wax. The handwriting read, "For the right moment." "What is this?" he asked. "Something for later," she said. "You'll know when to open it." That night, a thunderstorm rolled across the Georgia sky, fierce and wild, shaking the windows. Maya checked on Helen as lightning lit the room in pale flashes. "The storm doesn't scare me," Helen said softly. "It's the quiet afterward that does." Maya smiled. "Then I'll stay until it passes." Outside, thunder roared. Moments later, Helen's breathing changed, shallow, uneven. "Mrs. Whitmore." Panic hit. Maya called for Ethan. He ran upstairs barefoot, heart pounding. Seeing his grandmother pale against the sheets, he froze for a split second. Then instinct took over. Together they worked as one, Maya checking vitals, Ethan calling the doctor, lightning flaring around them like a heartbeat of heaven. "Hold her hand," Maya whispered. He did. Helen's fragile fingers curled weakly around his. "Don't look so scared," Helen murmured, her voice faint but steady. "It's not my time yet." Tears stung Ethan's eyes. The man who never cried, who built empires on restraint, now trembling like a boy. When the doctor finally arrived, Helen was stable again, exhausted but smiling faintly. "See," she whispered to Maya. "He still listens when someone tells him how to love." Ethan looked at Maya, breathless and shaken. In that storm-lit moment, he saw her differently, not as the woman who once walked away, but as the only person who had ever stayed without needing to. Later, when the house fell quiet, Maya stepped onto the veranda. Rainwater shimmered on the railing. The air smelled of earth and renewal. Ethan joined her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You should rest," he said softly. "I could say the same to you." He hesitated. "You saved her tonight. So did you." They stood side by side, watching the storm fade into distant rumbles. When lightning flashed one last time, it caught the silver locket around her neck, the same one he'd kept for months. "You still wear it," he murmured. "It's all I have left of her," she said. "And maybe a reminder of mistakes that became miracles." Their eyes met, and for once, neither looked away. "Maya," he whispered, "if you ever feel like running again, don't." Her voice trembled. "And if you ever feel like hiding, don't." The rain slowed to a whisper. Somewhere inside, Helen smiled in her sleep. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains. Maya found a note on the breakfast table in Helen's graceful handwriting. "My dears, you may think fate has been cruel, but it has only been creative. There are contracts signed with ink, and others signed with hearts. When the time comes, open the envelope. H." Maya read it twice, her chest tightening. Later that day, she saw Ethan standing by the garden holding the sealed envelope his grandmother had given him. He caught her gaze, and instead of opening it, he tucked it back into his jacket. "Not yet," he said. "I think it's meant for both of us." That night, neither of them slept easily. Outside, the crickets sang. The world had gone still again, but not empty. It was the kind of stillness that comes before something begins. In her room, Maya whispered to the dark, "If love is a contract, maybe this time I'll sign." And in his, Ethan stared at the ceiling, hearing her voice in memory. "You can't fix love with money." He smiled faintly. "No," he murmured, But maybe you can build it if you start from nothing. Some promises are written in paper. Others are written in the space between two people who dare to stay. Autumn came softly to Georgia. The Whitmore Gardens turned from green to gold, the air scented with pine and rain. Every afternoon, sunlight poured through the wide windows, like honey touching the worn edges of books, and the quiet rhythm of a house learning how to breathe again. Maya moved through the halls like part of that rhythm. Gentle, steady, needed. She had been living at the estate for nearly 2 months now, long enough to memorize the way the floors creaked near the library door, or how Helen liked her tea strong with a hint of honey instead of sugar, and long enough to know that Ethan Whitmore, for all his cold perfection, wasn't made of marble after all. She saw it in small things, the way he carried his grandmother's shawl when the nights turned cool, how he stood in the doorway, watching the rain lost in thoughts he never said aloud. Sometimes their eyes met across the room, and the silence between them felt alive. One evening, Helen was asleep early, the rain tapping softly on the windows. Maya was in the kitchen making tea when she heard footsteps behind her. Couldn't sleep either. Ethan asked, his voice low, almost shy. She turned. Rain keeps me awake. He leaned against the counter. Sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. For once, he didn't look like a billionaire, just a man trying to find rest. Tea, she offered. Only if you promise not to psychoanalyze me while I drink it. She smiled faintly. No promises. They sat by the window, mugs steaming between them. Outside, lightning flashed over the trees. Inside, warmth flickered like a secret. You built an empire, she said softly, but you look like a man still searching for something. He stared into his cup. Maybe because I am. And what is it? He hesitated. Then, almost in a whisper, peace. The word hung there fragile. I thought success would buy it, he continued. Then I thought control would build it. But all I've done is make the world quieter, not kinder. Maya watched him, this man who had once seemed untouchable, now stripped of his armor. You're allowed to be human, Ethan. He looked up, meeting her gaze. And you? Are you allowed to be happy? Her smile faltered. Happiness and I. We don't speak the same language anymore. Maybe it's time you relearned it. Something inside her shifted like the air before a storm. They sat in silence as thunder rumbled in the distance. Then softly, Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady. She didn't pull away. That night in New York, he said quietly, I've thought about it every day since. You shouldn't. I can't help it. It wasn't the mistake I thought it was. You walked away, and somehow that made me want to be better. Maya swallowed hard. You're not supposed to say things like that. Why? Because it makes it harder to keep my distance. He smiled sadly, then stopped trying. Later that night, the storm grew louder, wind shaking the shutters. Maya stood by her window watching rain blur the garden lights. A knock sounded at her door. It was Ethan, soaked from running through the rain after checking the generator. His white shirt clung to his skin, his hair wet against his forehead. The power's out, he said simply. She handed him a towel. You didn't have to do that yourself. Habit, he said, fixing things. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. You're freezing, she said, stepping closer. He laughed softly. I thought I stopped feeling the cold years ago. Then maybe you've just forgotten what warmth feels like. The words slipped out before she could stop them. He looked at her, really looked, and something unspoken broke open. The storm crashed around them, and he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't move. His fingers lingered, trembling slightly. "Tell me to leave," he whispered. But she didn't. And when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or wild. It was gentle. The kind of kiss that feels like a question, not an answer. She tasted rain and regret and something dangerously close to hope. When they finally broke apart, her voice was barely audible. "This changes nothing." "No," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "It changes everything." The next morning, sunlight returned, pale and uncertain. Maya pretended nothing had happened. She brewed Helen's tea, folded laundry, and smiled when spoken to the way people do when they're terrified of joy. Ethan, too, kept his distance, drowning himself in phone calls and business meetings he barely heard. But the truth lingered in every glance, every heartbeat. One evening, as Maya tidied the medicine cabinet, a wave of dizziness hit her. She gripped the counter, breath shallow. Her pulse thudded too fast. She waited, counting slowly, 1, 2, 3, until it passed. She told herself it was just exhaustion. But when it happened again the next day, stronger this time, she knew it wasn't. Her hands trembled as she opened the small clinic drawer where basic supplies were kept. Inside was a sealed pregnancy test, something left behind by another nurse. For a long time, she just stared at it. When she finally took it to her room, her breath caught in her throat as she waited for the result. 2 lines. Her knees gave way. She sat on the edge of the bed, hand pressed to her stomach, tears blurring her vision. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. Not now. Not when her heart had only just begun to heal. The storm outside had long since passed, but inside her, a new one was beginning. Later that night, Ethan knocked on her door again, holding a small box. "My grandmother asked me to give you this," he said. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with delicate letters, "For the one who brings light back." "She thinks the world of you," he added. Maya smiled through the ache in her chest. "She's the reason I'm still standing." He studied her face. "Are you all right? You look pale." She forced a nod. "Just tired." He hesitated as if wanting to say more, but let it go. When he left, Maya closed the door and sank to the floor. Her hand brushed over her stomach again, her heart breaking and blooming at once. "You're not a mistake," she whispered through tears. "You're the part of that night that still means something." Outside, the wind rose softly, rustling the trees. And somewhere in the house, Helen smiled in her sleep, as if she already knew. Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to uncover what your heart has been hiding. The days grew colder, and so did the air between them. Maya hid behind smiles and long shifts, her secret pressing heavier with every sunrise. She told herself she would wait just a little longer, until she knew what to do. But secrets have a way of finding their own light. One morning, Ethan walked into the sunroom to find Helen sitting by the fire reading the local paper. She looked up, eyes sharp beneath her glasses. "You're on page 3 again, dear," she said. He frowned and took the newspaper from her hands. There it was, a photo of him leaving the estate and another grainy image of Maya standing in the garden sunlight, tangled in her curls. The billionaire and his nurse. A hidden affair. The headline screamed louder than truth ever could. His stomach turned. "Who took these?" "The world is nosy," Helen said simply, "but don't let them ruin what's real." But the words barely reached him. His phone was already buzzing. Reporters, shareholders, PR advisors. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Whitmore's philanthropy under question. Foundation funds linked to CEO. By afternoon, the board demanded a statement. Ethan's assistant spoke in a clipped tone. "They want to know if she's your mistress, or if you're misusing company funds." Ethan slammed the phone down. Enough. But the damage was done. Maya heard the whispers before she saw the news. A patient's daughter showed her the article on her phone with a pitying look. "You poor thing," the woman said. "They'll eat you alive." Maya's hands shook as she read her own name in bold print. She felt exposed, violated, as if her dignity had been auctioned off without her consent. That evening she found Ethan in his study, pacing. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" she asked quietly. He looked up, his face, drawn eyes cold with exhaustion. "Tell you, Maya. The whole country is talking about it. Then say something. Deny it. Deny what? That you live here, that you're close to my grandmother, that you—" He stopped himself. But the damage was done. Her voice trembled. What, Ethan?" He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "That you used me, to get something more." The words hit her like a slap. "You think I wanted this? The attention, the shame. What was I supposed to think?" He shot back. "You disappear after that night, then reappear in my grandmother's house, under my foundation, living under my roof. Because I needed a job. You could have chosen any other one. I didn't know it was yours," she cried. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. They stood across from each other, strangers again. Finally, Maya's voice broke. "You can believe whatever makes it easier to hate me, Ethan. But I've never taken a thing from you. Not money, not pity, not even the chance to explain." She turned away before the tears could fall. By the time he reached the door, she was gone. That night, Helen found her packing. Leaving so soon, Helen's voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp. Maya froze. "I can't stay. Not after this." Helen sighed. "People will talk, my dear. Let them. You can't build a life worrying about echoes." It's not just that Maya whispered. "He doesn't trust me." Helen wheeled closer, her frail hand reaching out. "He doesn't trust anyone. Not yet. But he needs someone brave enough to stay until he does." Tears welled in Maya's eyes. "I don't know if I have that kind of strength." Helen smiled gently. "You do. I've seen it." But when she turned back, the suitcase was already closed. Ethan didn't see her leave. He spent the night drinking, staring at the silver locket on his desk. It had become a symbol of everything he couldn't fix or understand. When morning came, the house felt hollow again. The scent of coffee was gone. The piano in the parlor was silent. Helen was quiet all day. By afternoon, she called Ethan into her room. Her voice was weak but clear. "You've built your life on logic, Ethan. But love doesn't follow blueprints. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," she said. "When you find something rare, you protect it. You don't push it away." He sank into the chair beside her. She left. "Then find her," Helen said. "And when you do, open this." She handed him the wax-sealed envelope, the one she'd called the contract of hearts. "It was meant for both of you." Ethan stared at the envelope for a long time after she fell asleep. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in his grandmother's elegant handwriting. "To my dearest Ethan and Maya, love is not an agreement of convenience. It is a contract signed in patience, in forgiveness, and in faith. You both know pain. That is your common language. But you also know compassion, and that is the bridge between you. If you're reading this, then pride has already done its damage. Let it end here. Find her. Bring her home." Helen Whitmore. By the time he finished reading, his vision blurred. For the first time in years, he let himself cry. Hours later, he found a folded note left on his grandmother's bedside table. It wasn't addressed to him, it was from Maya. "Thank you for giving me a home when I had none. Please tell her I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye. Some truths are too heavy to share until you're ready to be broken by them. M. His hands shook as he read it again and again. Then his eyes caught a small medical file tucked beneath the note from the clinic's drawer. At the top, her name, and one word that made his breath stop. Pregnant. The letter slipped from his fingers. Outside, thunder rumbled again, soft but steady, like the echo of a promise not yet kept. Sometimes the truth shatters what's fragile only so it can be rebuilt stronger and finally real. Would you like me to continue with part 7, Between Life and Loss, where Maya's accident and Ethan's realization lead to their emotional reunion, the redemption and awakening before the finale, Ban Danoi. Ka ChatGPT Danoi. Perfect. Here is the full part 7, Between Life and Loss. 200 words. This is the emotional redemption and reunion chapter, where tragedy opens the door to truth and love, finally breaks through pride. Part 7. Between Life and Loss. The road outside Atlanta was slick with rain, the kind that blurs headlights into streaks of white. Maya drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the endless ribbon of highway tears, smudging the reflection of street lamps across the windshield. Her suitcase sat on the back seat. Next to it, the small envelope containing her test results. She hadn't told a soul. Not Helen, not Ethan. The silence in the car was too loud, full of things left unsaid. She whispered to herself, "You did the right thing. You left before he could break you again." But her heart didn't believe her. Back at the Whitmore estate, Ethan was a man undone. He had read the word pregnant 100 times and still couldn't make it mean anything real. The idea that she had carried this alone, his child, felt like both miracle and punishment. He called every hospital in Atlanta, every clinic in the Foundation's network. No one had seen her. By dawn, exhaustion turned his voice rough when he spoke to Helen. "She's gone, Grandma, and she's carrying my child." Helen's frail hand trembled slightly on the quilt. "Then go find her before you lose them both." "She doesn't want me," he said bitterly. I pushed her away. "Then pull her back," she whispered. "Not with pride, with love." Her eyes closed, and for the first time, Ethan felt true fear, the kind that no amount of wealth could quiet. Maya didn't make it far. Just outside the city near the old bridge over the Chattahoochee River, the rain thickened to fog. A truck skidded across the lane. Brakes screamed, metal crumpled glass shattered. The world went white. When Ethan's phone rang an hour later, he almost didn't answer. Then a voice said the words that shattered what was left of him. "Mr. Whitmore, there's been an accident. A woman named Maya Johnson. Your contact information was found in her belongings." The rest blurred. He didn't remember the drive. Only the sirens. Only the moment he saw her through the hospital window, still pale, a line of stitches above her temple. He froze outside the room until a nurse touched his arm. "She's stable. The baby too for now." His knees nearly gave out. For 2 days, Ethan never left the chair by her bed. He watched the monitors blink their soft rhythm. He counted each heartbeat as if it were his own. Sometimes when the nurses left, he'd whisper to her, "You don't get to leave like this. Not again. You hear me?" On the third night, when sleep finally stole him, he dreamed of rain the night they first met. But this time, she didn't walk away. This time, she turned back and said, "Love isn't about control, Ethan. It's about surrender." He woke with tears on his face. Maya stirred the next morning. Light spilled through the blinds, soft and golden. When her eyes opened, the first thing she saw was him, head resting on his folded arms, beside her hand. Her lips parted dry and fragile. "Ethan." His head snapped up, eyes wide with relief. "You're awake." Where am I, St. Mary's Hospital? You've been out for 3 days. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her ribs. He gently steadied her. Easy, he murmured. The doctor says you and the baby are both safe. Her gaze flicked to his. You know. He nodded, voice breaking. I found the file. Tears welled in her eyes. I was going to tell you. I just couldn't face the look on your face. The one that judged you, he said softly, or the one that loved you. She turned away. You don't know what love is, Ethan. You only know what it costs. He reached for her hand. Then teach me, please. Something in his voice made her look back, and for the first time, she saw not the billionaire, but the man who was terrified to lose her. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said. Maybe not, she whispered, but you deserve a chance. He pressed his forehead to her hand. That's all I need. When Helen arrived at the hospital later that day, she found them sitting quietly, Ethan reading aloud from a book, while Maya listened, her head resting against the pillow. I see healing has begun, Helen said with a smile. You planned this, didn't you? Ethan teased. Oh no, dear, she said, eyes twinkling. I just prayed that the two most stubborn hearts I've ever met would finally break at the same time. Maya laughed softly, the sound like a new beginning. That evening, as rain brushed the windows, Ethan stepped out into the hallway alone. He pulled from his pocket the letter, Helen's contract of hearts. He read it again, slower this time, each line sinking deeper. Love is not about possession. It is about presence. It is not a transaction of power, but the quiet surrender of fear. If you are reading this, you have already been given another chance. Use it well. When he returned to the room, Maya was asleep, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. He sat down, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and whispered, You've already saved me twice. The least I can do is spend the rest of my life proving it. 2 weeks later, they left the hospital together. Helen welcomed them back to the estate with tears in her eyes and a smile that looked like peace. Ethan renovated one of the guest cottages near the garden. Maya filled it with warmth, flowers on the table, sunlight through lace curtains, the faint sound of laughter returning to the halls. At night, he'd rest a hand on her growing belly and whisper, Do you hear that, little one? That's the sound of a home being built. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Whitmore wasn't afraid of losing control. He was finally learning how to let go and hold on to what truly mattered. Sometimes life must take us to the edge of loss, so that when love finds us again, we finally know how to stay. Would you like me to continue with part 8? When Morning Returns, the hopeful and healing finale, where Maya and Ethan begin their new chapter together, and destiny comes full circle. Ban Danoi, Kokui Fanay Koloi Kilgoi Hangdong Chat GPT Danoi. Perfect below is the full part 8. When Morning Returns, the emotional cinematic finale of the story. 200 words. It delivers closure, healing, and the warm sense of a second chance, fulfilled ending with a gentle call to action CTA that speaks to the audience's heart. Part 8. When Morning Returns, spring arrived in Atlanta like a quiet promise. Soft rain, blooming magnolias, sunlight spilling over the Whitmore estate, as if even heaven wanted to stay a little longer. 3 months had passed since the accident. The house, once a museum of silence, now pulsed with life. Laughter echoed through the halls again. The sound of piano keys mingled with the chirping of birds outside. And in the garden under the shade of an oak tree, Maya Johnson sat, with a paintbrush in one hand, and her other resting gently on her round belly. Ethan watched her from the porch, a faint smile curving his lips. He'd seen many miracles in his lifetime, inventions, that powered cities, ideas that changed industries, but nothing compared to the quiet miracle of this woman. "You're staring?" Maya teased without turning around. "I'm studying," he said, walking toward her. "Trying to figure out how you make everything look so alive. Maybe because I finally am," she said softly. He knelt beside her, touching her hand. "How's my favorite artist and our future masterpiece? We're both good." She smiled. "The doctor says we'll meet her in 6 weeks. Her?" His brows lifted. "Mm-hmm." Maya nodded. "I saw the ultrasound. She kicked the moment your name was mentioned." Ethan laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from a place newly rebuilt. "That sounds like trouble already. She's yours after all," Maya replied. Later that afternoon, they walked to the main house. Helen was waiting in the sunroom, a shawl around her shoulders, her eyes bright as morning light. Time had thinned her frame, but not her spirit. "You're glowing, child," she said, as Maya knelt beside her chair. "It's the sunlight," Maya joked. "No," Helen whispered. "It's love." Ethan kissed his grandmother's forehead. "You were right about everything." "Of course I was," she chuckled. "That's why I'm old. I've had more time to be right." They laughed together, but there was a tenderness beneath it, the kind that comes when love has finally stopped running from itself. That evening, the Whitmore Foundation hosted its annual charity gala. But this year, instead of the Marble Ballroom in New York, Ethan held it right there in Atlanta, under the open sky, surrounded by lanterns and the scent of spring. Guests from across the country came, philanthropists, artists, doctors, people whose lives had been touched by the foundation. At the center of it all, a new banner fluttered in the gentle wind, the Second Chance Foundation. Founded by Maya Johnson and Ethan Whitmore. Maya took the stage, her hands slightly trembling, but her voice steady. "A year ago, she began, I was a nurse, trying to survive another day. I didn't believe in miracles. I believed in making it through. But then, life reminded me that miracles aren't grand. Sometimes they're just small acts of kindness that ripple farther than we can see." She paused, looking toward Ethan, whose eyes glistened in the light. "This foundation isn't about money. It's about people who fall and find the courage to stand again. Because love, in every form, deserves a second chance." Applause filled the night, soft at first, then swelling like a tide. Ethan joined her on stage, taking her hand. "She's right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For years I built walls so high I forgot what sunlight felt like. And then someone walked through the rain into my life and tore them down without even trying. Maya, you didn't just save my grandmother. You saved me." Maya's eyes shimmered. "You saved yourself, Ethan. I just reminded you how." As the gala ended, fireworks lit up the southern sky, gold, crimson silver bursts, reflecting in the lake beside the estate. Maya leaned into Ethan's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and sure. "Do you ever think about that night in New York?" she asked softly. "Every day," he admitted. "But now I see it differently." "How so?" "It wasn't the night everything fell apart," he said, smiling faintly. "It was the night everything began." She looked up at him, eyes glimmering like the fireworks above. "You think fate had this planned all along?" "I don't know," he murmured, brushing his thumb along her cheek. "But I know this. If the world ended tonight, I'd still thank the storm that brought you to me." Weeks later, the morning came when their daughter was born. The air smelled of rain again, gentle, familiar. Maya held the tiny baby in her arms, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as Ethan watched awestruck. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours," Maya said, smiling through the tears. Helen was there too, sitting near the window, her hands clasped in prayer. "What will you name her?" she asked. Maya looked at Ethan. He smiled. Grace, they said together. Because that's what she was, grace after pain, light after darkness, morning after a long, endless night. Months later, the Whitmore estate became more than a mansion. It became a home for them, for Grace, and for dozens of women. The foundation helped start anew. Maya often sat in the garden with other mothers, telling them softly, "You don't have to be unbroken to be loved. You just have to be brave enough to believe again." And every evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan would join her holding their daughter, whispering, "We made it, Maya. We made it home." Love isn't about how you start. It's about having the courage to begin again. Because every heart deserves its second sunrise. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever lost faith or thought love had passed you by, remember this. It's never too late to begin again. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Tell them, morning always returns even after the darkest storm.